Right here, then, you wee rages. It's Mr. Truel here, doing my best Scottish accent to get you into the. Oh, I can't do that any longer. Hello, everybody. It's me, Mr. Trowell. That was my attempt at a Scottish accent because obviously Macbeth is a Scottish play. So the next 3 lessons, you've got the pleasure of my dulcet tones. This is what we're going to be doing. So today we are going to be looking at an extract question, which is the first question in the Macbeth exam. It needs you to do some really close focus analysis, and we're going to be practicing those skills today. Now, obviously, these next 3 lessons are really important because they are your first taste of the GCSE exam. Next lesson, we will look at the actual essay question you're going to be answering. We'll unpick it and we'll do some planning, which is really going to help you when you come to write up your response, which I know you'll all be excited to do. And then finally, lesson 3, we'll be writing up our responses and doing a little mini self-evaluation. And I promise not to do any more accents, probably. You'll need all the usual good stuff, pen, paper. You might want a highlighter if you're feeling fancy. And you'll also need the extract from Act 3, Scene 2, which should be on Show My Homework. On Show My Homework as well is something called a No Fear Shakespeare. Act 3, Scene 2, which basically has the Shakespearean text, the stuff that we're studying, on the left-hand side, and then a sort of up-to-date modern version on the right-hand side. So that might be useful for some of you. Some of you might want to have a go without it and then try with, but it's up to you. It's there to help you if you need it. And finally, you'll definitely want to keep these things in your Macbeth English Lit folder, because this is stuff that we're doing directly for the exam and it's important, and hopefully it will have a real impact on your grade. So make sure that you store these notes somewhere safe. You'll be able to see straight away that this is an extract featuring a conversation between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, and it's not obvious straight away, but they are discussing Banquo. So to start the lesson off, I want us to think about why Macbeth might be scared of Banquo. Is it because of the prediction of the witches of the Weird Sisters? Maybe it's because he knows that Banquo is a good man, and at this point in the play he's just killed King Duncan, and perhaps is worrying that his own soul is now tainted. Is it because he needs to justify this action of killing Duncan by ensuring he has a successor, and he's scared of not Banquo but Fleance? Or is it something else, or a mixture of these things? This extract comes from Act 3, Scene 2, so it's pretty much slap bang in the middle of the play. Duncan has just been murdered by Macbeth, as we've already said. Donalbain and Malcolm, Duncan's sons and the rightful heirs to the throne, have fled through fear that they're now unsafe, and Banquo and Fleance are still with us for now. And we're looking at a conversation between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and Macbeth is very clearly troubled here. It's a pivotal moment for him. It's a pivotal moment in the play. He's committed this one crime, and we're wondering, and he's wondering, how many more he's going to have to commit in order to secure his position as king. He's also plagued by insecurities. There's a big change from Macbeth the noble warrior to Macbeth the man who murders the king under his own roof at this moment in the play. So it's a really useful piece of the text to know, not just for this extract question, but also for the essay question, which you'll come on to later in the term. Before we discuss the extract in a bit more detail, it's really useful for you to get down your own thoughts. Now, hopefully you're at a point in the term where you feel a bit more confident with the language Shakespeare's using. We know there's a conversation between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, but what are your initial thoughts? What's the main focus of their discussion? What are they actually talking to each other about? The question is going to look at Macbeth, and particularly Macbeth's state of mind. So how would you describe him here? Is he cheerful? Is he scared? Is he angry? Is he something else? And finally, are there any words or phrases which jump out at you? Now, it might be a particular word that you don't understand, or it might be something which seems like it's conjuring up a specific image. But these are going to be useful for you as you analyse the language later on. Now we'll go through the scene together. It doesn't matter at this stage whether you've got everything right. The chances are you haven't. You've probably got some bits right and you've probably got some bits wrong. And that's okay, but what you do want to know is which bits do I need to pick myself up on, which bits am I doing well on, and why is that? So the scene opens with a concerned Lady Macbeth. She's worried about her husband. Now, Macbeth enters and he explains the reasons for his mental anguish, for his state of mind at the time. And mainly it seems to be that Banquo is still alive. And as we know, Banquo's son, Fleance, is prophesied by the witches to inherit the throne. So Macbeth clearly believes in that prophecy because he's become king, and he's worried that he has no heir. He has no son, he has no child whatsoever. And so when he dies, all of his evil actions will have been for nothing, because there'll be no one in his family to take the kingship from him. He's also troubled by the murder of Duncan, and he finds it impossible to sleep or rest, which is clearly affecting his mental state as well. And we see a Macbeth that's very stressed, on the edge, and not like the calm, confident warrior that we saw at the start of the play. Now, Lady Macbeth reminds him that he's got a banquet to which he's invited all the nobles, all the important people of the time, and he needs to be cheerful, jovial, a good host, because it's the first time that he's going to be presented as king to these people. Macbeth then interrupts and asks her to give lots of attention to Banquo, and we see him starting to scheme a little bit here. And he doesn't really explain why, but he just wants her to really look after Banquo. And he finishes the soliloquy by claiming his mind is full of scorpions, which is this lovely repeated reptilian imagery you might remember from the start of the play. Lady Macbeth tells Macbeth to look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. And we get this similar image repeated here, but with scorpions instead of a snake. And he says the reason that his mind is full of scorpions is that Banquo and Fleance are still alive. So that's what happens in the extract. But why is it important? Well, it's the first time really when we see Macbeth's mental breakdown being developed. It starts his mental breakdown when he begins hallucinating the dagger during or just before Duncan's murder. We also see the first signs of a breakdown between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth in terms of their relationship. She doesn't seem quite as clear as what's going on, about his plans to have Banquo, who is his best friend, and Fleance, his best friend's son, killed. Now, lots of people will see a difference between these two murders, including maybe Lady Macbeth, including probably you, and certainly including audiences at the time. In killing Duncan, Macbeth directly secures the kingship for himself. There is a direct relationship between what he does and what happens to him. But in killing Fleance and Banquo, this is more of a result of Macbeth's superstition and a belief in the prophecy. He's hoping that years down the line this is going to benefit him, but it is certainly not going to have any impact, or certainly not any positive impact in the moment. Hopefully by now then you've got a really good understanding of the extract and you know what it's about and you feel confident and comfortable in it. If you don't, then you can have a look at the No Fear Shakespeare translation text, which has got sort of a more up-to-date version alongside the extract. What we're going to do now is we're going to focus in on language. Now you can do this however you like. You can annotate on your text if you've got it printed, or if you can do it on your computer, or you can make a note of the quotes that you're going to talk about on a piece of paper to go into your folder later. So what I'd like you to do is pick out 6 quotes from the text which you're going to discuss. Now I've picked 6 points here which we'll go through together, but if you want to stretch yourself, and you probably do at this stage, then you'll want to have a look at some of your own as well, because you'll have these 6 anyway. So what you're trying to do is develop your own ideas. In selecting your quotes, you're trying to pick ones that are revealing about how Macbeth is feeling at the moment. Remember, the focus of this question is going to be on Macbeth's state of mind at this moment in the play. Not anywhere else, not before, not after, but at this moment, what's Macbeth's state of mind about? So you'll want to pick quotes which help you discuss that in a meaningful way. Right, let's go through these and we'll have a look and start to unpick some of the language that Shakespeare's used. So starting with number 1, again, you're going to want to annotate or make a note of this somehow, whichever makes sense for you in your setting. So number 1 is from Lady Macbeth, and the first thing I picked out is the exclamation mark. Now, it seems like a really trivial piece of punctuation, but actually it helps us understand that she's either really concerned or worried or surprised. But this isn't a full stop. Shakespeare's letting us know that Lady Macbeth is shocked in some way when she sees Macbeth. Why also helps us understand the growing distance between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth that we talked about earlier on in this lesson. She just doesn't understand the reasons that he's keeping to himself. So she's clearly worried about him, but she also feels like she doesn't understand him so well anymore. And the final thing I've picked out from this quote is the word fancies. Now, fancies is kind of her downplaying the seriousness of it. It's kind of a frivolous word, kind of a word that suggests whatever's troubling Macbeth isn't as important as he thinks it is. Now, number 2 comes from Macbeth, and I've picked out 3 words here. The first word, scorched, which is this word which brings to mind all this imagery of fire and hell and viciousness, which, if we think back to our question, which is about Macbeth and his state of mind, is really useful for exploring that. We talked about the word scorpions earlier on in the lesson, and here we see the word snake, which again links back to not only Lady Macbeth's look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it, but also that image of Adam and Eve and the snake and deception. And there's a sense of irony here, because he's saying that Banquo or Fleance is the snake, whereas really the audience is thinking actually Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are the ones that we describe as snakes here. And the final one I picked out is the word killed, which is again vicious, savage, and reveals the brutality of Macbeth at this stage of the play. Okay, so for number 3, we've got 4 words: treason, worse, steal, poison. Now, the first word, treason, is an actual crime. To commit treason is to commit a crime against the king. And Macbeth's saying here that the crime of treason he's committed has done its worst on Duncan already. Now, Duncan can't suffer anymore. Macbeth's treason has put an end to that. Duncan is dead. And he goes on and says that there's neither steel nor poison can touch him further. So he's kind of revealing to the audience that he feels like at this moment he's in a worse place than Duncan, which suggests, if we think that Duncan's dead, that Macbeth would rather be dead than how he's feeling at the moment, such as his state of mental anguish, and is really the beginning of a depression, I would say. In contrast to that, for number 4, we've got bright, jovial and guests, and again this is Lady Macbeth speaking, and it helps us understand the distance between these 2 characters. She's using all this cheerful, upbeat language which is just so far away. You know, if you think about the contrast between jovial and poison, or bright and treason, we see this big gap between them here. For quote number 5, we've got make our faces visards to our hearts, and this is basically a repetition of that idea of deception which we saw earlier in the play. And what's being said here is that we need to hide our true intents. And we see this theme of deception being built up, and again it helps us understand what Macbeth's state of mind is at this point in the play. He's no longer the noble, honourable character. He's trying to be deceptive. He's willing to pretend to be something he isn't. And then finally, probably the most significant quote in the scene, and certainly the one that you're going to want to remember for later on, is "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Now, there's two things I'd like us to pick out here. And firstly, this image of scorpions, this really brutal, gruesome image. If you think about your brain and there's scorpions crawling all over it and you feel like they might sting you at any moment, and that's how Macbeth feels. He's on tenterhooks, and it's this really graphic image which is really unpleasant for us to think about, and it helps us understand the stress, the anguish, the negativity that is Macbeth's state of mind at this moment. Now, I also picked out dear wife because it contradicts other things that we've seen earlier in this scene. We've talked a lot about the gap between these two characters and how really Macbeth's not treating Lady Macbeth as an equal, but we have also got underneath all that some signs of concern. We've got the exclamation mark, which we started this little section on focusing on language on, and now we've got dear wife. And we might be thinking back here to that dearest partner in greatness, which is what he calls his wife in his letter to her at the very start of the play. But clearly, although the relationship is beginning to break down, it is not completely destroyed yet. And these two, who have just gone through this hugely traumatic experience together, they've plotted and gone through with the murder of the king under their own roof, clearly have some distance to go yet. So make sure you've got some notes on those at the very least, and also hopefully you should have 6 or so quotes of your own which you've unpicked, and you're looking at the language that Shakespeare's using. If you haven't done that, if you felt I don't really feel confident in doing that, hopefully having looked at those 6 little bits, maybe I don't know how many, 15 words or so, that you could discuss, have a go at just 3 of your own now to make sure that you're getting your own ideas down as well as the ones that we're discussing here. Let's finish off today's lesson then by summing up our understanding of the extract. Oh, wait a minute. Can you just put it on the table? Someone just brought me a mini milk, although it's a chocolate one. No one likes chocolate mini milks. So, as we're summing it up, we need to think what happens in this scene. Not only what takes place, so we've got a conversation between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, and we know that he's talking about his ambitions for the throne, but also we need to think about why it's important. We need to think about what's changed, so we see Macbeth as a changed man. He's no longer the Macbeth at the start of the play, and he's really becoming the Macbeth that will dominate the later stages of the play. And finishing off, how does this scene set up the events that are going to happen later on? So you want to aim for about 4 or 5 sentences which you're going to distill down into 1 or 2 for next lesson. So just finish off today's session by making a note of those 3 points. I'm going to enjoy my mini milk.